This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. When you sign up for CuriosityStream using the link in the description, you'll also get access to my streaming video service, Nebula. Enjoy. What is the worst Radiohead album? I think many fans would be tempted to say Radiohead's worst was their debut, Pablo Honey. It was fairly generic and bland alternative rock. Not bad, just unoriginal in comparison to the monumental leaps they would take with consecutive releases. Although, it was the album that brought us Creep, and introduced the world to this promising new act. The group had yet to fully prove themselves, and surely any band would love to know that their greatest efforts followed their initial release. So in that sense, I think Pablo Honey kind of gets a pass. So what is the worst Radiohead album? Well, The Bends was an improvement on all fronts, bringing some of their most memorable moments. OK Computer and Kid A are widely considered some of the greatest alt-rock records of all time. Amnesiac felt like Kid A leftovers, but still stood on its own 2 feet as a notable project. The political Hail to the Thief likely carries their most mixed bag of tracks, but in its bloated runtime lies some considerably strong tunes. They would remedy the previous lack of focus with the exceptionally colorful and confident In Rainbows. But then we got The King of Limbs, the worst Radiohead album. Radiohead begins every album by asking themselves what they don't want to do next. In Rainbows was developed during extensive touring and live experimentation with songs. When work began on a follow-up 2 years later, the group knew they didn't want to just pick up their instruments and play, nor did they solely want to sit in front of a computer all day. Their desire was to strike a happy balance that involved playing and programming. Luckily, after spending some time DJing in Los Angeles, longtime producer Nigel Godrich approached Radiohead with an idea: that the band used turntables and vinyl emulation software to manipulate their conventional instruments. They would sample their rock fundamentals during jam sessions and transform them into intricate loops, entirely by electronics. Tom York would step in to add melodies and lyrics thereafter, and what was meant to be a 2-week experiment ended up taking 6 months and led to an entire record, The King of Limbs. But the idea certainly sounds more interesting on paper than it ended up being musically. It made for a fun experiment, but one that possibly did a disservice to these tracks. Let me explain. Bloom opens the record with these pulsing, hypnotic electronics and a shuffling 5/4 breakbeat drum pattern. It eventually swells towards a bit of an orchestral crescendo, but 3/4 of the way into the 5-minute track, the familiar loop begins to get a bit repetitive. And that's the album's main problem. There are just simply no surprises to be found in many of these trance-inducing loops. The glitchy and sporadic guitars and rhythms are welcomed, and the eventual thudding and swirling synths provide some variance. But again, the tracks fail to build towards much, instead staying relatively flat when it comes to their overall evolution. The King of Limbs features only 8 tracks. It's still the shortest Radiohead album to date, at a brisk 37 minutes. But if anything, that shorter runtime saves this record. Track lengths average out to over 4.5 minutes here, and get tedious fairly quickly because of that continual looping technique. And so the shorter length of the track listing prevents it from becoming overly boring. In an effort to offer some variety, Radiohead actually break the album into 2 very distinct halves. The first sees them kick off the album with some great momentum and an attempt to reinvent themselves. It revisits that Kid A era with a greater maturity, but is much further removed from guitar rock than even that record was. The new element of exploration here is rhythm. Rhythm dictates the first half of The King of Limbs. You'll immediately notice the glitchy sequencing and uneven time signatures. Little by Little is one of the more guitar-driven tracks on the album, and its quirky, clanging percussion is fun, but almost too robotic. They managed to balance this out with a chorus that is much more emblematic of classic Radiohead, offering some melodic relief. But it's one of the few tracks that offer any true release from those musical knots, leaving a lot of the humanity in their instrumentation missing. You only have to look at Kid A to hear how well they managed to make electronics feel as human and organic as possible. The latter half of the tracklist appears more desperate to please original fans. featuring more serene and acoustic elements. Lotus Flower is definitely one of the album's highlights, blending human hand claps with an icy synth bass line. It features York's best vocal performance on the record and some compelling syncopated drum patterns. The final 3-song run feels much more in line with what the In Rainbows sessions brought us, but where In Rainbows is colorful and warm, The King of Limbs is monochrome and cold. Codex is a chilling piano-led tune, including sparse production that's led by a muted kick and shimmering chimes at moments. But aside from York's dreamy vocals, it's pretty lackluster, and eventually ends on some ambient field recordings before venturing into Give Up the Ghost, an acoustic folk tune with Fleet Fox-like vocals and harmonies. The album closes with a bright, gently plucked guitar tune and the same constant drum pattern throughout, ending on kind of a whimper. These two halves contribute to making this Radiohead's most divisive record. Some consider the latter half too doomy, others wish the first half were less abstract, and the majority would agree that there was little reason to return to it. After 3 years of waiting on a new album, this was Radiohead's new big statement? It hardly holds up as an LP, feeling more like a collection of tracks than a cohesive record. And despite its repetitive nature, its length left us begging for more. But make no mistake, The King of Limbs is still a well-made album with a beautiful collection of songs. The band still delivered the goods, even if they were few. It's the band being craftsmen rather than pioneers for once. So it's an album that should be looked at as a transitional moment. And it's because of this album that York would go on to make things like 2019's Anima. But, and there's a big but here, nearly every song on The King of Limbs is way better when performed live. If you haven't, I highly recommend you listen to their King of Limbs from the Basement session. Because they created this album in a vacuum, the idea of turning these studio creations into a concert experience was panic-inducing. It would take them some time to arrange the album for live performance, working backwards just to learn how to play the record's parts. They found that they needed a second drummer just to perform some of the more rhythmically complex material, and because of this, the loops become these rhythmic monsters. The dance essence of these tracks really come to the forefront, and the live setting allows these instrumentals to truly breathe. Lotus Flower just gets even nastier with two drummers. To top it off, they include the few singles they released leading up to The King of Limbs, but failed to include on the final record, a decision that complements and fleshes out the album's shorter duration. Radiohead have enjoyed the weirdest forward progression of any major rock band. Naturally, they have come to set a high level of expectation for frequent reinvention. The King of Limbs is certainly eclectic, but for a band who prides itself on their sonic evolution and growth, this felt like something we've heard them do before, just not quite as well. Still, it reminded us that Radiohead never stop attempting to twist their music into something new. The way the group uses electronics to add texture to The King of Limbs is fantastic, but it's that reliance on electronics that are this album's downfall. It's those repetitive sequences that leave many tracks feeling too skeletal to really make an impact. It's fairly minimalistic, and it does build a beautifully chilling atmosphere. It's just missing a bit of the grand and inventive magic of earlier releases. But the worst Radiohead album? That's like picking your least favorite child. Let's just say that you did have a least favorite child. Well, you'd still love that child more than most other children. Radiohead are kind of like that. Their worst things are still so much better than 90% of everything else out there. So the margin between their worst album and, say, the one above it is minuscule. But I'd be willing to bet that no one's favorite Radiohead song is on The King of Limbs. I mean, even Pablo Honey has Creep. Thanks for watching, ladies and gents. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you loved it, and hit that bell so you're notified of when the next episode goes live. You can follow us at More Middle 8 on Instagram and Twitter. Middle 8 record brushes are now in store, so get them before they're gone. Check out the Middle 8 Madness podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts. Links to all that are below. My creator friends and I have teamed up to build our own streaming platform called Nebula, where we don't have to worry about copyright claims or how much music we use in our videos. It allows us to create without limitations. On Nebula, our content is ad-free and can push some boundaries since we don't have to worry about YouTube's constant restrictions. And we've partnered with CuriosityStream so that we can keep making it happen. CuriosityStream is home to some of the best documentaries on the internet. The platform loves educational content and educational creators, which is why we worked out a deal where if you sign up with the link below, you'll get CuriosityStream with Nebula for free. As long as you have CuriosityStream, you'll have Nebula. And right now, CuriosityStream is 41% off. Keep learning during this winter quarantine and venture through a new streaming platform or two. Ever wonder what music will sound like in the future? Well, Sigourney Weaver's got you covered in Music of the Future. Find out if a computer can write a hit musical, or check out some exclusive content from Polyphonic and Volksgeist on Nebula. Head to the link in the description to get both CuriosityStream and Nebula for 41% off. Or you can go to curiositystream.com/middle8. Help support this channel and educational content in general. But tell me, what's your least favorite Radiohead record? Let me know in the comments below. But that's it for me. Again, thanks for watching, and keep listening to Radiohead.